Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss the sickening roll call of despicable human beings that has been sent to the House of Lords by Boris Johnson, or at least recommended, but it's going to happen, for services to the Kremlin, and how the blonde buffoon is yet again highlighting the need for us to radically modernise all aspects of our democracy. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, the UK and America, come to that, have a number of things in common. One of them is an archaic system of government that has essentially tootled along because of traditionalists not wanting to reform, without, to be fair, any major failures, down purely to the fact that our elected representatives in the most senior positions in both countries had at least a functional sense of honour and some regard for their country. And in both countries, we now have governments who do not fulfil either of those criteria to a basic level at all. Boris Johnson has announced the elevation of some truly reprehensible characters to the House of Lords yesterday, including some others who are not in themselves reprehensible, but the reasons they've been sent are. This includes, for example, Sir Ian Botham, decent enough chap, cricket legend, but he's on his way to the House of Lords, not because he's a bloody good cricketer, or at least was, but due to the fact that he was arguing in favour of Brexit. He's a good little Brexit boy. Kate Hoey, who was the former Labour MP that was also a hard Brexiteer, along with two other Labour MPs, former Labour MPs, who were also dyed-in-the-wool Brexiteers. The Russian billionaire Tory donor Evgeny Lebedev. Now, surely this one is basically Boris Johnson saying, Russia report? What Russia report is that then? Taking the piss. A whole host of Tory party donors come to that. There's also a nod for Boris Johnson's brother. Hey, bruv, do you fancy going to the House of Lords? Yeah, sure, why not? Off you go, son. Potentially the most sickening of all is Claire Fox. Claire Fox, Brexit Party stooge, who defended, amongst other things, as well as climate denial, the presence of child pornography on the internet multiple times. So there's no problem with that. All blown out of proportion. Making a fuss about nothing. You know, one of those people. There are a couple of decent appointments in there. You've got former Conservative MPs Ken Clarke, Philip Hammond, who did occupy senior positions in government and are therefore qualified to ascend to the upper house. But the vast majority have displayed no knowledge or interest in the actual workings of Parliament before now, and yet they are going to be part of it. It is also going to swell the number in the House of Lords when the government had promised to go easy on new appointments because it's getting silly, quite frankly. There's not that much room in there. And why is this such a problem? Because, you know, why is this cronyism much worse than, for example, throwing out knighthoods for political favours? I mean, Theresa May's husband, for example, is getting a knighthood out of this. A lot of people complain about that. I don't care, not bothered. I didn't make a fuss about Ian Duncan Smith getting a knighthood. You know, I'll scratch my forehead and I'll furrow my brow. It's irritating. But it doesn't fundamentally hurt anyone. Water for ducks back. Forget it. Little chunter, get on with it. Knighthoods are honours. All there is to it. That's all there is to it. You know, we like to think that knighthoods go to decent people that have done right by their country. We know that's not the case. Why do we get het up about it? But peers in the House of Lords are part of our legislature. They are fundamentally part of our system of government. They scrutinise and pass legislation. Now, it hasn't really been acceptable, I suppose, to have an unelected upper house in modern democracy for some time, in any country. But at least when the bulk were made up of people who understood Parliament, it sort of worked after a fashion. But Johnson is packing the House out with stooges in order to remove yet another balance against his power. People are calling for the abolition of the House of Lords. Don't be bloody stupid. Then there'll be no check against a corrupt government, much less this one. The reason why Boris Johnson's trying to pad it out with his cronies is simply to nullify the House of Lords. Therefore, he sees the House of Lords as a threat. You want to get rid of that? Don't be daft. But the House of Lords in its current state, yeah, of course, it needs completely overhauling. As soon as these charlatans are finally removed from office and we get something resembling a decent government again, because when Boris Johnson's kicked out, we're not guaranteed to get anyone decent in his place. We're probably unlikely. But at some point, we are going to get a decent government, I hope, whether it be a Labour government or a Conservative government. They need to sit up and take stock of just how much damage a head of government with no moral compass can actually do, and put it right for the future. And there are so many things that will need doing, not least of which, of course, is proportional representation for elected MPs to the House of Commons, something that Keir Starmer looks like getting behind. But it has got to include making the entire voting proportion of the House of Lords elected. It's got to. Now, I'm not opposed to politically appointed lords. There are some advantages in having experienced parliamentarians elected to the House of Lords, because if they were experienced lawmakers, MPs, who were really involved, they have a certain knowledge and experience that is useful during debates. You want that expertise in the House of Lords. I'm fine with those appointments in order to take part in the scrutiny. But for the love of puppies, just have them as advisory peers. They can go along there, they can have their say, but the only ones who should ever vote on legislation should be directly elected by the people. And this would also allow another huge benefit as well that we currently lack in the UK. Because at the moment, the way legislation works very simply is this. So someone in the House of Commons proposes a bill. It's debated and MPs vote on it a few times. As long as it's going through each time, they've got a chance to change it and whatever. If it gets through the House, then it goes to the House of Lords for the same treatment. Debates, votes, that sort of thing. Now, the House of Lords usually comes up with sensible objections if there's something wrong with the bill. If not, they pass it through. But if it does have a failing, and usually when the Lords observe a failing, it is a genuine failing, they send it back to the House of Commons with amendments, with changes. They don't just take it back and send it back and go, this is bloody stupid. They amend it and send it back. The House of Commons then has three choices. One, it can accept the amendment. It can go, oh yeah, fair enough. Vote it through one last time and it will become law. Done their job. Two, they can reject the amendment and go, no, we want it exactly as it is. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave it until the next session of Parliament. Well, might be a few months in the future, might be a year down the line. And then they can force it through the Lords using the Parliament Act. Or three, they can reject the amendment, say, no, we liked it how it was, but we're not going to mess about waiting for another session of Parliament either. And they can send it back to the Lords and say, you might want to think about it again. How about that? Now, in that final scenario, which has happened fairly recently, if the House of Commons is really determined, and it's fairly obvious to the House of Lords this wasn't a knife-edge vote, it was a clear majority in favour of it, and they've sent it back, the Lords usually drops its objections. Because after all, they're not elected, and the House of Commons are. In other words, the House of Lords do behave decently in deference to the democratic mandate. But if the Lords were to be elected, or at least all of the voting members of the House were, then they would have a democratic mandate to block any legislation coming from the Commons that is not seen by that House as the best interests of the country. It would give us a powerful balance against a corrupt government. It wouldn't be perfect. After all, the United States has such a system, which isn't working all that well right now. But it would be a whole lot better than the situation we have now in dear old Blighty, and would have avoided an awful lot of the shit that's happened in this country in recent years. So, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask Starmer to add yet another job to his massively increasing in-tray for when he hopefully becomes Prime Minister in 2024. It may well already be on his mind. He was talking recently about the need for major electoral reform recently. I took that to mean the House of Commons, but he wasn't explicit, so he may just as easily have meant both Houses of Parliament. It certainly needs it. Cronyism in terms of awarding honours to your friends, family, paymasters, I mean, that's one thing. It's distasteful. It's undignified. But it happens. Being able to appoint these people into positions of deciding our laws is abhorrent in modern society. and it must not be allowed to continue for much longer. But there it is. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.